Hello, it's укрлайф TV, and we continue our broadcasting from Kyiv, from Ukraine. And our guest today is a teacher of international relations, Mridula Ghosh. Mridula, hello, and thank you so much to be with us today.
Hello.
Mridula, we speak to you today after the end of the G20 and before the United Nations General Assembly. And it is a very good reason to speak about the results of this meeting, G20, and about the declaration. Because the declaration is quite important thing, and this declaration starts many discussion about this declaration in USA. And President Biden and Mr. Blinken explain why they support this declaration. And this declaration was supported by all participants of this G20. But this declaration was very contradictorily understood here in Ukraine. That is why, if it is possible, please let's speak about the results, maybe a little bit, and about the declaration. Thank you.
Well, to start with, India for the first time presided over G20 since it started its existence. It was very important for India to have such a forum because in this 21st century, it was like a big event. First of all, G20 is a forum which is not something countering the countries of the North. This is a forum uniquely placed to bring part of the North and part of the global South together. And it encompasses a lot of interests, a lot of national interests of different countries, even, and to bring all of them together and to shape a common agenda is something that was a very daunting task for the organizers, India, and which happens to be my country. So I would say I am proud of it that India could do a lot. And in fact, it showed, I would, without any exaggeration, say that the master stroke of the Indian diplomats, that Indian diplomacy has risen to a level that is extremely professional, and they could get together to shape a common agenda for all countries, the consensus. Consensus was a big problem for the G20. In fact, it was threatening, again, Ukraine was the cornerstone around which all these discussions started since the Bali Declaration, which definitely was very much in favor of Ukraine, at least the third and the fourth paragraphs, which openly criticized Russian aggression and called on Russia to remove its troops from Ukraine. Those two things were very, very important. However, since Bali till the G20 summit in Delhi, there were lots of meetings that took place at the ministerial level. And in March, especially in March, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, ministers of foreign affairs, they could not arrive at a common joint document. So that was a very threatening signal. What was done was also a very ingenious way, that was bringing the third and the fourth paragraph and putting it and mentioning that these two paragraphs are put from the Bali Declaration. We are putting it because everybody agreed. But in this, the China and Russia are not agreeing. So it was mentioned as a footnote. So since then, India was very, very worried that, at the ultimate end in September, when the 9th and 10th, when the summit takes place, there will be no joint declaration. And the absence of a joint declaration means the death of G20. 20 countries. I understand that, there has been a serious and terrible violation of international law, violation of Ukraine's sovereignty, violation of territorial integrity of Ukraine. But however, let's remember it happened in 2014 and not just in 2022. We must take it since then it happened, So if we take it, then there was a lot of Minsk negotiation and a lot of things happening. So this war was, taken very seriously because it was an all-out war, an all-out invasion which started, if those were proxy invasions and annexations of Crimea and part of Donbass, but this time it was open intervention without mentioning the word war. However, the word war is mentioned in the declaration. The only problem is that this declaration is softer because if you compare it with Bali, it is softer because it doesn't mention Russia, who's the cause of aggression. Number two, it doesn't ask Russia or, announce that Russia to take away its forces. These two definitely, to my opinion, yes, they could have been. But as you know, President Putin did not attend the summit, number one. Number two is Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, he attended. And even before that, both the Foreign Minister of Russia and even the Russian Ambassador, Denis Alipov, clearly stated that if the joint declaration does not express our view, we will boycott, and then if there is no consensus, there will be no declaration. So it was an ultimatum that was issued. So this was very, very threatening for the G20. And you can imagine the situation that the Sherpa, Amitav Kant, who was, the head of this organizer who headed the process of drafting of everything, is a very experienced diplomat. So they were put in this very, very difficult situation. The foreign minister of India definitely said things, even I wrote a column, I wrote against the fact that Ukraine was not invited. I think Ukraine should have been invited, whether or not, it gets anything tangible from the summit or not, at least to be heard. But however, it was decided not to invite Ukraine. And also you can see that Xi Jinping or President Putin, none of them participated. So China and Russian representation level was lowered. Okay, so now to talk of the declaration, I'll tell you the detail how it happened as was narrated by the Sherpa himself. The Sherpas, they got together. They had 200 hours of negotiation. 300 meetings. They were working
200 hours of negotiation.
Yes, 200 hours of meetings. So it was a very hard work. And at the end, what happened was, even on the 9th, even on the 8th, it was not sure what will happen. So the declaration was drafted, basically these points which relates to Ukraine especially, which is a very interesting, by the way, chapter, which is called Planet, Peace and Prosperity, the 3 Ps that is related to the whole planet for peace and prosperity. So over there, it starts with 7th paragraph and ends with the 14th paragraph. The general ideas about a conflict-free world it expresses, but here we have 8, 10, and 11 paragraph, which mentions clearly Ukraine and Ukraine's problems, Ukraine's pains. That I think is also, we should not look at only the negative side of it. Why not mention Russia? But Ukraine is mentioned in the way that it has suffered. It has, the war in Ukraine, it mentions. Of course, it doesn't mention, but I will, it is like a bottle you have which has half full and half empty. If you look at the empty part, you miss the part that is full. I would try to draw something, little bit of positive things which Ukraine needs today in order to enlarge its support all over the world. I think that is critical for Ukraine, because for the West, it is important to have India's support, to have Global South support. The West understands, your allies, Ukraine's allies understand how important are the countries of the Global South for them. So I think Ukraine should also show that, these countries matter, not just in the verbal expression of any declaration, but the real relations matter. This is so important. In this sense, I want to say that the 14th point and the 8th point, 10th and 11th, they explain a lot of things about Ukraine. The grain deal that was, the Black Sea grain deal. Of course, they mention both Russia and Ukraine, that grain should come out of these countries and be supplied, and there should be no hindrance. In another one, they mention the UN resolution of the General Assembly, which majority of the countries supported, and the Security Council resolution. Another one, they mention about the general humanitarian crisis. So in all this, and also they mention, the 14th, the last paragraph of this chapter mentions that today is not an era of war. The statement made by Prime Minister Modi on the face of President Putin in Samarkand in autumn of 2022. So if we take all this package together, I would definitely say, number one, nothing is against Ukraine. We must see, number one. Number two is it gives a very broad framework, and it helps Ukraine to build from here an architecture of its own security further. It does not impair or damage Ukraine's security needs. It doesn't do that. So I have to assess in that way. And interestingly, how this was drafted was a fantastically interesting process. Till the last moment, nobody was aware that this will happen. And so when, Indonesia as the previous presiding country, India, the current one, and Brazil, the future one, which has already received the trophy from India, and South Africa. So the three continents came together, and the Sherpas of these delegations drafted and finalized this and put it on the table, telling that either take it or leave it. So it was like either you have it or you don't have it. So it was like something that the West agreed with, all the countries. So finally, if Russia and China did not agree to it, they would be the ones who are jeopardizing and who are sabotaging the summit, right? Whoever did not agree with this. So this was devised, the document, the four countries that worked on the document. This is according to the opinion of the organizers. And then it was passed. And it was passed even a day before, not on the 10th, but on the 9th. So you can imagine the sense, the nervousness with it, that, let it be passed as soon as possible. And Prime Minister Modi announced it. I would, again, stress on the positive sides of the declaration. Globally very positive, because it's a joint declaration. Again, it's a declaration. It's not something maybe binding. Life will tell us and time will show how the things develop further. A lot of things are very important for bringing the global South and the global North together. There is a consensus on reshaping the financial system, the multilateral financing system to be developed. Then the digital public infrastructure is something that India is very serious with. There are a lot of these issues which are, women's participation was widely talked over, that enhancing women's participation is important. I mean, there were a lot of these things which are also somehow touching the 10 points of the Ukraine's peace formula. There are points in the Ukraine's peace formula which are going tangent, to these. They are having relevance also. I would try to find out those exactly. I haven't done a research to tell you all about that, but I do see reflections of many of the thoughts of nuclear security. For example, in one of the points, it is mentioned that threat with using nuclear weapons is unacceptable. So, by reading the piece of the declaration, you can understand it is not mentioning Russia, but it is directed towards Russia. Anyway, it's somewhat like not even allegorical. It is very much like it goes without saying something. So again, I will say it could have been better if against Russia some stronger statements could be there, but it was not possible. So we have to come to terms with what is available and not what we would ideally look like. Our world is what we live in. We cannot have all what we need. We can have what is maximum we could. So I think the G20 achieved whatever maximum it could.
Mridula, do you think that this declaration is a result of new strategy or new type of cooperation between Western countries and countries of Global South? What I mean, I know that it is a very big and strategic interview of Mr. Blinken on the State Department, on the web of State Department. And it is very interesting discussion among journalists and Mr. Blinken about the cooperation between Western countries and countries of Global South. And it seems to me that now we have a little bit changing of strategy of USA and Western countries. And how you could command this, and I agree that now we see that this declaration is a beginning, or it could start new type of cooperation between Western countries and countries of Global South. And by the way, some experts say that it seems that India is preparing to launch a new big infrastructure project with together with Western countries, and some experts even call this a new project like a new Silk Way, and it is not very comfortable for China. Yeah. Sorry for such long, question, but nevertheless,
you have put forward very excellent ideas, which I really admire the way you have conceptualized the whole thing. First is one of the very important points is that the declaration, the wordings and everything was a joint effort, especially why I mentioned these 4 countries in drafting Ukraine, this part. The Russian and Chinese narrative is that this is a West-dominated agenda. It was not a West-dominated agenda. It generated from the South. So the West agreed to it, which is very important, It's extremely important to understand that the Western world agrees to the agenda that is presented by the Global South on Ukraine, even the wordings, okay? So I believe that Ukraine's peace process, negotiations, the winning of the war, and many other things will take, its own course, and it will happen. So G20 at least did not harm Ukraine. It could do more, but it did not harm Ukraine. Yes. And in all this, you can see that by this process of bringing the global North and the South together, it is better for Ukraine, because this is a shape of the new world, and which, in fact, Ukraine war has stimulated this thinking, because if Ukraine war, the war against Ukraine by Russia has stimulated this thought that, what is happening to all the other countries of the Global South. And as you know, they were dominated by Chinese capital and China. There was a big influence of China. And China was even helping these countries have infrastructure, and they spent a lot of money and a lot of resources. Of course, we also know Russia also has a big stake on the Global South through its own, channels since the Cold War, and they have their, supportive countries. And these countries, being post-colonial, they had a very anti-Western, anti-colonial, which is synonymous. Today, I think that is slowly reforming. The anti-colonial stance is a little bit reforming, because the West has reformed itself. The West has to look like West is understood that they need to have a fresh approach and a fresh look at these countries. And these countries also understood that we should not have the old school understanding of the West, because, the world is changing. We must be doing things together. So this coming together has a very interesting dimension, which is good for the world, because, if you have belligerent states which are using its resources to initiate coup d'etat in Africa or in other places, I believe that one of the good things that India could do is to include African Union, although African Union is not able to control regimes falling apart or things happening in Africa or the civil wars, but still it's a group of 54 nations, which is a big chunk of the Global South, So it's not just South Africa or Egypt or, separate countries which are wealthy, or Nigeria, but it is the whole continent, which is a very big anti-colonial, I would say everybody looks at it, from that point of view. So African Union inclusion, as today it is G21, so it's not G20 anymore. If you include, like, European Union is a member, so why not African Union? European Union is a global north, and so we have from the global south African Union. So it's a very logical idea, and I think this is a very good way of, you can see what you said. I will just affirm your understanding that there is an alliance between countries of the understanding, at least, between the global north and the global south on a wide spectrum of issues, including Ukraine.
What we're worried about is compromise, because if we have Western position on Ukraine and position of global south, some months ago it was, very deep. It was absolutely deep difference between this position. Now we're not sure that this position are so deep. That is why we are worried about that, and we don't like the word compromise. What do you think about it?
But compromise is something that is not to be prescribed and imposed on Ukraine. Definitely not. It is the Ukrainians to decide how much to compromise and where to compromise and with whom to compromise, on what issues to compromise. It is not anybody's, wish that, Ukraine should compromise. No, definitely no country is telling that. Yes, there were talks, that you should start talks with Russia, have a ceasefire, and there were such plans, and we know those plans didn't work out. And those attempts to mediate is something that is, of course, going to fail, because, mediation is only possible if there is a definite political will for mediation and necessity. But I don't see either will or necessity in this case, because the war is going on and all war crimes and all the things happening. I would tell you that the territorial integrity clause in this declaration is mentioned in the same that, no territory can be usurped, can be, annexed or, occupied. This is mentioned. So territorial integrity is something that will be maintained, and political independence. These two things are mentioned there. So both gives respect to the sovereignty of which country? Of Ukraine, because its sovereignty, its political independence, and its territorial integrity was violated. So I would say that in this declaration, there is nothing that so greatly mentions as Ukraine has to compromise. So leaving the room for, Ukraine to do its job, what it needs to do, I think that is better than, asking for Ukraine to sit at the table and negotiate. That is not there. So I think that this is something that will be the peace negotiations that, started in Copenhagen and in Jeddah. I think next week in the General Assembly, I heard, I'm not sure if I say wrong things, but I heard there will be almost a Ukraine day, they will discuss Ukraine very seriously. So it might be the General Assembly, there can be a special session of the Security Council, whatever. Now, several things I want to mention, which we should also look at those happenings beyond the G20 Summit and Declaration. One is the bilateral meeting between United States and India, and a joint statement was issued. A huge number of areas there are cooperation that have enlarged, and especially the ships that will be in the Indian Ocean will be serviced at Indian ports, the US ships, US vessels. So this is important from the point of the Indo-Pacific dialogue and the Quad, the Quad which refers to the four. And of course, another thing is that the technological cooperation in the area of engineering, in the area of education is very wide. This is important from the bilateral point of view and the increasing, relationships that is forging. So this itself is important, that for the United States today, India is a growing, it's a serious partner that in United States would like to work with. This is good news, this is good news. And I think we should reflect on this. As Ukraine builds its relations with India, this factor should also be taken into account. The second thing is United States, President Biden mentioned that they would support in the future, not today, not tomorrow, any permanent seat for, if there are any proposals to give a permanent seat for India in the Security Council. So if that happens, then India has a stake in Security Council. So this was a big dream for many years. And so again, a country of the global south will be included. Also, there are other countries who like to be included, we know, but this is a real, India is a representative of the global south. In that sense, I think this was also something important within the sidelines of the summit, this kind of a statement from the US president. The other thing that you also mentioned, this route, it is not Silk Route, it was called the Golden Route, which really existed in history. It starts from India by ship, then it goes to Saudi Arabia, goes through the Arabian Peninsula, and then it goes to the Mediterranean Sea, then it crosses and goes to Europe. So it will connect India, it will connect the Arabian Peninsula, then it will go to Europe. So this was very important for the US because they have the other route through Atlantic. So, this is also very important from the point of, there is only one monopoly of the Belt and Road Initiative of China, So I heard that, Turkey is not very happy with it. Doesn't want.
Turkey is not happy?
Yes, I heard that. I heard that they are
Why?
not happy with this project. Well, we don't know because it is opening an alternative. Maybe they have some other, because many countries are left out over there. Because you see, we are not going through the Central Asia, through the land route. It is going the sea and then the Arabian Peninsula, through the countries which can guarantee security and safety. Like this is a region which has a lot of conflicts, So we have to see how the route is shaped. This is not the Silk Route. It was the historical Golden Route, which was there, existed. The sea route when Arab traders used to come to India, buy spices and gold and take it to Europe. So that's how the trade continued before the colonizers came to India and came to India and China. So the Arab traders were operating. This is a very old. Yes. This was the old route.
Is this big project a problem for China?
Well, it might not be a problem because China has its own, there can be many more routes. I will again think that there is no trade-off. Like if there is another route that China takes through Central Asia, then it goes depends, if these routes really matter, because trade will be there as long as human beings will exist, and we need safer trade routes. What we need is security and safety along those routes. That is more important for any country.
Mridula, thank you so much to be with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mridula Ghosh is our guest today, and thank you very much to be with us. See you.